You've probably heard the term a million times by now, right? Critical race theory. It's all over the news, all over social media. It's been called a lie, bunk, even every bit as racist as the Klansmen in white sheets. The whole debate has gotten so loud, so heated, and honestly, pretty confusing. So let's try to cut through all that noise and figure out what is really going on.
This is where it all seems to kick off, right? At these chaotic school board meetings. Places like Loudoun County, Virginia, have basically become ground zero. You see meetings getting shut down, people getting arrested. You can feel the passion, the anger, and the genuine concern from parents who are worried about what their kids are being taught. But underneath all of that emotion, there's a huge misunderstanding at play. So that gets us to the big question we're tackling in this explainer. What is critical race theory, really? And how on earth did a pretty obscure academic idea suddenly become this political lightning rod that can sway elections and totally dominate the news cycle?
Now, if you're sitting there feeling a little confused by it all, you are definitely not alone. It's not just you. A recent survey actually found that most Americans, no matter what side they're on, have a really hard time explaining what CRT even is. And that confusion? It isn't a bug. It's pretty much the central feature of this whole debate.
And get this, the confusion goes all the way to some of the loudest voices fighting against it. This is a prominent critic, and you can hear him admitting flat out that he has no idea what CRT is, literally seconds before he goes on to confidently explain what he thinks it is. It's a moment that just perfectly captures the bizarre, contradictory nature of this whole thing. Okay, so here is the absolute key to understanding this entire debate. We're dealing with a tale of two very different definitions. On one side, you have the original, academic theory, and on the other, you have a political label that's been purposefully slapped onto a whole bunch of other things. People are using the exact same three words, critical race theory, but they're talking about two completely different things. All right, let's start with the original. Academically speaking, CRT is a graduate-level legal framework. It started back in the 70s and 80s with scholars asking a pretty specific question. Hey, we passed all these huge civil rights laws, so why are we still seeing such deep racial inequality? The core idea they explored is that racism isn't just about what's in someone's heart. It can actually be built right into our legal systems and policies.
And to hear one of its leading scholars, Kimberlé Crenshaw, explain it, she says the goal isn't to tear America down. Far from it. She sees it as a deeply patriotic project, one that's trying to understand our full history so we can finally live up to the nation's promise of equality for everyone.
So, if that's the real academic theory, how did it become this catch-all term for, well, everything? The answer is, this controversy didn't just happen by accident. It was intentionally built.
Meet Christopher Rufo. He's a conservative activist, and he's the self-admitted architect of the anti-CRT movement. And what's wild is how open he was about his strategy. He said, in his own words, that the goal was to take this brand, critical race theory, and just attach it to everything controversial until the name itself became toxic. So how did it work? Well, the strategy was simple, but it was also devastatingly effective. Step 1, find the most clumsy or extreme examples you can of diversity workshops or classroom lessons. Step 2, label all of them critical race theory, even if they weren't. Step 3, go on Fox News to blast it out there. The end game was to turn CRT into this universal boogeyman for any conversation about race that makes people uncomfortable. And was it amplified? Oh yeah. To give you just a little sense of the scale of this media campaign, the term critical race theory was mentioned on Fox News nearly 5,000 times in 2021 alone. That is a full-court press. And you know what? It worked. And the impact wasn't just talk. It turned into policy almost immediately. Rufo goes on TV, he calls on then-President Trump to ban these kinds of trainings in the federal government. Trump apparently sees the segment and just a few days later issues that exact executive order. That one moment opened the floodgates for a whole wave of similar bills at the state level.
And this manufactured panic is having very real consequences in the real world. It's creating what people call a chilling effect in classrooms all across the country.
Just how widespread is this? Well, since January of 2021, a staggering 37 states have introduced bills or taken other steps to restrict how teachers can talk about race and sexism. This is not a fringe issue. This has become a full-blown, nationwide legislative movement.
And the thing about these laws is that the language is often incredibly broad and really vague. A law in Tennessee, for example, bans any teaching that could cause a student discomfort, guilt, anguish, or distress because of their race. Because that's so open to interpretation, it's led to some wild situations. Teachers being told to just avoid the word diversity,
In one pretty famous case, a teacher in Tennessee was actually fired for showing students an article by Ta-Nehisi Coates in a poem about white privilege.
You know, a really common defense for these laws is the idea that we're just trying to uphold Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. We hear that content of their character quote all the time. But that quote was an aspiration, a goal. Later in his life, King himself said that his dream had at points turned into a nightmare, and that some of his earlier optimism had been a little superficial. It's that more complex, challenging reality that these new laws often prevent students from ever learning about.
But as we start to peel back the layers here, it becomes pretty clear that for some of the people pushing this, the fight is about a lot more than just what's in a textbook. They've actually revealed a much bigger long-term goal. Let's go back to Christopher Rufo, the architect himself. He connects the dots for us. He says, yeah, first, we have to get CRT out of schools. But the long-term goal? Give every parent a right to exit. The strategy seems pretty clear. First, create a crisis of confidence in public schools, and then offer parents a publicly funded exit ramp into private schools.
Now, this whole push for school choice has a really long and pretty complicated history. The modern movement actually got its start right after the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision. See, when the court told schools they had to desegregate, many southern states created these voucher programs specifically to help white families flee the public system and go to newly formed private schools, which quickly became known as segregation academies.
And if you look at the curriculum in some of the schools that benefit from these voucher programs today, well, the content can be alarming. An investigation into textbooks used in some Florida voucher schools, for instance, found passages that really downplayed the horrors of slavery. One textbook even claimed that an enslaved person who knew Christ had more freedom than a free person who didn't.
So all of this, it brings us to the core tension in this whole debate. When these laws talk about banning lessons that cause discomfort, we have to stop and ask a really important question.
Because for a lot of students, discomfort isn't something a teacher introduces in a lesson plan. It's just their daily reality. As this graduate from Loudoun County Schools put it, kids of color don't really have the option of not thinking about race. You know, whether it's being the only non-white face in the room or just feeling all those eyes turn to you during a lesson on slavery, that discomfort is already there. So, while the public debate over critical race theory is loud and confusing, and as we've seen, often based on a deliberate rebranding, when you dig into it, it forces us to confront this really fundamental issue. In this effort to protect some students from feeling uncomfortable about the history of race, whose comfort are we choosing to prioritize? And whose real, lived discomfort are we choosing to ignore?